Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined today by Andrew Wilson from All Under One Banner.
Good afternoon, Kenny.
Hello, Andrew. And joined for the first time today by Gwen Sinclair from Yes East Ayrshire, Ayrshire CND, and now from the Scottish Independence Foundation as well.
That's right, yes. Hello.
Brilliant. So we will get to talking about some of that in a wee minute, but our first story today is on Boris Johnson's wee jolly to the Caribbean, where he was given a £15,000 holiday, but doesn't want to tell anyone who paid for it. Andrew, have you been following this story at all?
I have a little bit. I think, speaking personally, I think this is another indication of the strongest theme of the Johnson administration so far. And to me, that theme is that Johnson doesn't care about anything or anybody other than Johnson. He hasn't thought about the implications of doing something like this. He hasn't thought about how it might appear. No matter what actually happened, the appearance of accepting such a generous gift from a business leader, that doesn't look great. Mm-hmm. and I think it's just another indication that the only thing that Johnson cares about is Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems that way. We've got a note here from Tommy Shepherd, the SNP MP, who set out a bunch of questions for Boris Johnson to answer. For example, who directly paid for the villa in Mystique? Why did he choose to conceal the source of the payment in the official register of interests at the House of Commons? So what's your feeling on this? Is this just Boris Johnson being incompetent, not knowing how to fill in his register of interests, or do you think it is, as Andrew says, that he just doesn't care anymore?
I don't know if it's either of those things myself. I think personally there's just this entire sort of elitism that runs around the whole circle of his life, and the expectations of that type of parliament, that type of government is extremely outdated, and I don't think they would think there was anything wrong with doing any of this stuff, and accepting £15,000 holidays is just part of what they would expect within that circle. We are obviously hoping for something a little bit more modern to be happening in Scotland, and again, it's just showing us the divide between what we would believe to be acceptable and what they're actually producing for us at the moment.
Yeah, and what do you think it is that causes that divide? I mean, is it just the way that Boris Johnson's always had this kind of life where he gets to do what he wants and nobody challenges it, or do you think there's something about him as Prime Minister that makes it worse?
Well, I suppose, we don't really know what he was doing, apart from, occasionally he's written some pretty ridiculous articles prior to being Prime Minister, and obviously he's been, in positions of power. But no, I actually just genuinely think this is all just what they do, and it's quite normal for them, and it's an expectation. There was a lot of larks going on with the previous Prime Minister as well, with David Cameron and Osborne. To me, they were just like a boys' club and having a bit of a laugh. So this is just what they do, I think.
Yeah, Andrew, we talked about this actually earlier in the week on the show. Where Jeremy Corbyn had a go at Johnson at PMQs, saying there's one rule for a black kid and one rule for a white kid like him who's dabbled in cocaine as a teenager. Claimed quite proudly that he had looted Fortnum and Mason with some friends from the Bullingdon Club after a wee night out in London. And now this, is there a problem here where the ruling class in Britain just doesn't think the law applies to them?
I think there's plenty of evidence that that's certainly the case for this current Prime Minister. His outing for a joke of his former editor, Dominic Lawson, as being an MI6 asset, which didn't do particularly well amongst the security services and caused concern when Johnson became Foreign Secretary. His antics with the Bullingdon Club, his course of conduct throughout what would appear to be his attempts to help his friends arrange the beating up of a journalist who was making inconvenient inquiries about another friend. I think it certainly indicates that his life so far has been consequence-free, and I think the First Minister's comments this morning in the Times suggest that she feels that Johnson's time of living a consequence-free life may be coming to a close. He has nowhere left to run now. Now he's got the job he always wanted. But certainly a consequence-free lifestyle, and a lifestyle that certainly suggests that he or those who surround him think that yes, the law of the land does not apply to him. And I suppose even in discharging his role as Prime Minister, his determination to prorogue Parliament unlawfully again suggests that he either doesn't care about the law or it doesn't feature in his thinking and in his calculations.
And what can we as the mere humble citizens of the land, what can we do about a Prime Minister who doesn't care about the law? I mean, it seems like one of those things where, we don't have any power. We can't go and stop him.
Well, I suppose
and even in Scotland, we don't have the power to vote him out. So,
Indeed. I suppose in some senses we're seeing citizens taking recourse to the courts. There are a couple of court actions either planning or in the early stages of progress in Scotland with regard to constitutional questions or legal questions. And so I think there are things that citizens can do through the courts. We can also make plain our dissatisfaction with and our rejection of that approach and of our rejection of a society in which these things are acceptable. And one of the ways of demonstrating that dissatisfaction is on the streets. I think part of what we will see over the next year is increased mobilisation and increased participation by citizens demonstrating their dissatisfaction with what is going on. I know we've had great amounts of activism and demonstration already as we came up to up to Brexit Day. But I think that agenda, that approach is going to continue, and we're going to see more of it. And I would like to see more of it coordinated with other aspects, so more political action in Westminster, more political action in Holyrood, and more legal action if required, either in London or in Edinburgh at the same time.
Okay. Well, we will move on now to another story of a wealthy man perhaps taking risks around legal actions. This is Prince Andrew, who has been described as visiting the home of a man who has now been charged with raping 10 women and girls. This is Peter Nygaard, who allegedly lured young, impressionable and often impoverished children and women to his property in the Bahamas, only to then assault, rape and sodomize them. He is alleged to have hosted Prince Andrew and his family for a holiday in the Bahamas in the year 2000. Now, this is obviously not the first time we've heard Prince Andrew associating with people who had some fairly disturbing relationships with young women. What do you make of this? What's your kind of gut reaction when you hear about this kind of thing?
Well, basically, it takes my mind right back to that interview that he did, which was just absolutely appalling. It was clearly, the questions that he was answering weren't particularly truthfully answered. It was quite obvious. There was a lot of poor me drama has been thrown into the mix to try to wriggle out of it, and I don't think it convinced anybody. So I don't think this is going to be looking too good for Prince Andrew. Actually, there's yet another story coming out. So.
Yeah, and Andrew, you what's your feeling on this? Is this just again that a rich entitled man who doesn't know when to kind of when to stop? Well,
I think certainly the intersection or the interaction that you're mentioning between from our perspective would be unlimited wealth or unlimited power, certainly from our perspective as citizens, the intersection between that level of power and that amount of money and what appears to be alleged criminality and a disregard for the appearance and for the implications of this kind of conduct. So in the interview that Prince Andrew gave his explanations as to why he persisted in visiting with Epstein, even after Epstein had been convicted, I think to most people in the country just don't ring true at all. And I think that is likely an indication that the combination of power and wealth to that extent, without consequences and without an understanding of the implications of what that conduct will bring, I think there might very well be a consistent problem between the behaviour of the Prime Minister and the behaviour of Prince Andrew.
Gwen, these are wealthy, powerful men. Whether we're talking about Epstein, whether we're talking about Peter Nygard, the man who's accused here, he's a multimillionaire, and then people like Prince Andrew. Is there just something about being a rich, powerful man that makes you want to abuse teenage girls? I mean, what do you think is going on there?
Well, I don't really think...
I mean, just solve the whole problem of sexual assault, you know. But what is going on there?
Well, basically, an absolutely shocking and hideous list of accusations there. I mean, just absolutely dreadful. And what we need to remember is that every single one of the people who's involved in that's life's been pretty much ruined. You know, it's been a life which is going to be very difficult to overcome a lot of this stuff, you know, and I don't think that's ever really considered, right? I always consider the backstory. I always think... I can't possibly say whether it's definitely connected to wealth and power, riches, but it certainly throughout history has been a definite connection.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as to say that this kind of thing wouldn't go on with people who didn't have power. So that's not really the issue here. But what is the issue is that it's coming out, and and I think that's an important point. I do think that in the past a lot of the stuff was being covered up or wasn't given the attention it should. So, and with each of these situations, it will make it less acceptable for any of these behaviours to continue, and that's something I would completely support.
Yeah, I mean, these are groups of girls. You know, this report said they were lured to his property in the Bahamas with cash payments and promises of modelling opportunities. Now, these kind of industries, I mean, we've heard the Harvey Weinstein case is a very similar sort of thing, promises of wealth and fame. What can we do to kind of help girls know that, you know, guys who are making these promises are not the ones to look for? We should be looking for, you know, actual opportunities, and how can we find a way to steer people away from these sorts of entrapment almost?
Well, I suppose just a bit of education, but really the basis of all of this would probably be poverty. People who are really needing money and who are not going to see any future, they don't necessarily know how they're going to be able to make money. They're obviously, without having money in the world, you're in a state of being quite vulnerable anyway. If you can't afford to do things and you've got a bit of ambition, you're quite young, you've probably got quite a lot of ideas about things you'd like to do, and these people come along and basically exploit that. And so there has to be, I think, some kind of extremely strong laws against it, and also the education system needs to make sure that's known, because it can happen through the internet as well. People are, you know, are going to believe things that they're told, and that does commonly happen. But I do think that we're doing quite well in getting that information out there, but perhaps even more so.
I think to Gwen's point, I think it may be the case that we see that historically that young people and young women and women had a different value, or they were not valued in the same way by powerful men or by men. And that the long tail of child abuse claims that I think we're only beginning to uncover, to be honest, and the Weinstein stories, Epstein stories, of which are just two examples, of which I'm sure there are many, many more. I think we are making finally we are now beginning to make progress with defending people's rights and asserting people's rights, be they children or women, and the approach the approach that we see in society is changing as well. The Me Too movement is an example, but the way in which the rights of women and young people were disregarded or were devalued in the past, I think that's much less possible now. The problem is not nearly fixed. There is a great deal of work. There's a great deal of work to undo what has been done in the past, and there's a great deal of work to make sure it doesn't happen again. But work is underway now at last. Yeah.
Well, of course, you know, I think as long as someone like Prince Andrew, you know, within the last few months was still willing to meet with Epstein, so, you know, it's clear that there's still some way to go before we're at a point where this is properly kind of just unacceptable behaviour. Anyway, we do have to move on, unfortunately. So we are now looking at Scotland in the EU. A leading expert has claimed that an independent Scotland would be moved into the fast-track line to join the EU, exposing yet another unionist scare story. This was James Kerr-Lindsay, who's a professor at the European Institute at the London School of Economics. He told the Herald that assuming the paperwork is all in order and there haven't been many or significant divergences, one would expect it to overtake the other countries in short order and join the EU relatively quickly. This comes on the heels of Donald Tusk telling the BBC last week that Brussels would be enthusiastic about an independent Scotland rejoining the EU. And this won't come as much of a shock to anyone who paid that much attention in 2014, when there were certainly quiet signals coming out that the EU wasn't going to put up huge barriers to Scotland. But of course it was one of the major stories that we got hit over the head with. What difference do you think it makes to the independence movement now to have the EU being much, much warmer in its language and much more legal opinion saying, yes, of course this will work out fine?
Well, I think it's really good news. I very welcome that, because I think that's something that obviously by the voting, every single constituency voted to remain, so clearly it's a very popular thing in Scotland to remain in the EU. But let's also remember the people who live here, who've contributed for years and years and years, who come from other parts of Europe, right? And I like to say other parts of Europe because we actually are Europe, whether they like it or not. Who live here. So we would hope then, because I do know that we spoke to quite a few people from Yes East Ayrshire, and we spoke to people who lived there who were from the EU who weren't going to vote yes because they were afraid in case they would have to leave. So we did lose quite a lot of votes. So hopefully this time, and we would be able to bring that message out to say, listen, this is pretty much likely to happen. But I do, and that's quite a strong message, isn't it? To let people who live here already decide to vote with Scotland this time to remain, to get independence. So.
Yeah, and Andrew, what's your feeling on this? Do you think it's going to make a difference, first of all, to the messaging that the unionists put out?
Well, it might do. I think the unionists still have some lessons to learn. Sorry, they still have a lot of lessons to learn around about the EU. I think, with regard to what Donald Tusk said, I saw the interview, and that he said that he felt very Scottish. I think was a very strong message, delivered in his own style. He's a quietly spoken gentleman, but he said, "I feel very Scottish," which was great. I think the unionists will, over the course of this year, will begin to learn or understand what the UK being a third country means. I suspect they will find out about that first in connection with Gibraltar, but the fact is that the EU will now treat the UK as being a third country and will negotiate and act accordingly, and will also act in support of those countries which are still members of the Union. And so there will be friction and conflict in connection with Gibraltar quite quickly, but the same applies in Scotland. I don't necessarily adhere to the view that there are any queues. I don't think the queue metaphor is great. I understand why the professor used the language, but as I understand it, there is no queue. All applicant states are assessed on their own individual state of readiness and their position to apply and be accepted as members. So it's more that there is a line of different countries moving forwards, moving closer to the EU, rather than a single queue or two queues. But notwithstanding any argument about metaphors, the point, the issues that the professor is commenting on, I think, are absolutely right. We in legal terms currently abide by the acquis communautaire, and we've done so for 40 years. The mindset and the approach that Scotland and Scottish people generally take is in favour of the Union and in favour of free trade across Europe, not least because Scotland's been pursuing free trade across Europe since the Middle Ages. So it's not a new story for us. And I think the point about divergence is a concern, because if there is a determination in Westminster to diverge as much as they can, as quickly as they can, and that may or may not be the case, that'll make it more difficult, but it doesn't make it insurmountable. Our status as an independent Scotland, which has been closely aligned to the acquis communautaire for 40 years, ought to certainly give us a considerable advantage and make it relatively straightforward. We have spoken and understood the ways of politics and the rules-based approach that the EU promotes. We've understood and operated that for 40 years, and so in terms of our our attitude and our approach, I think we are there already. And in that sense, what the professor says is absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. And Gwen, what's your thought about where the campaign for independence goes now? Because we've seen a lot of things during the gap since the Brexit vote and actually leaving the EU at the end of January. A lot of the talk that was thrown at Scotland was, do you want to go through all this hassle again? Do you really want to have all this upset and all this turmoil? Do you think that this idea that we would move quite smoothly back into the EU, do you think that will settle some of those nerves?
Possibly it will, but I do think that's just spin that's been put out there, because in actual fact the upset and the hassle that's going on is a drip that's going on every single day, because people they're basically stripping back our welfare system. Our pensions are still the lowest in Europe, and there's an increase in the pension age, etc. All these day-to-day things which are affecting people. So it's a constant upset in that respect. So I'd say that's just spin to put out there, and all you have to do is go out and vote anyway. It's not really that much of a big deal. In fact, you don't even have to go out. You can get someone to vote for you, or you can do a proxy vote. It's really not that much hassle compared to what people had in the past, which was no right to vote. So it's not really, I think that's just something they like to make us imagine that we're let's get Brexit done. This thing that they're saying, well, they're not really getting Brexit done, are they? They didn't do very well this week with their negotiations, did they? And there was somebody who was in the queue in the airport in Amsterdam who became famous because he'd be saying, this is not the Brexit I voted for, I've had to wait for 55 minutes. Which became quite big news, actually.
Clearly it is the Brexit he voted for.
It is, and that isn't even potentially the case yet. It could just have been a queue, but they will be waiting in a different queue, which we do know is going to take people longer when they're travelling. So there's a lot of stuff still to come out yet within Brexit. But I suppose, and to answer to your question, towards independence, for each of these things that happen, we can say, well, the way not to have this is to vote yes, and we will do all we can to get us back into the EU, and that reassurance, has been really good. And so therefore, we can have maybe a nicer future, I would say, in that way. But although we have to also remember, there's people who want independence who don't want us to go into Europe. So that will be another issue again, I guess, after we've become independent again.
Yeah, I suppose at that point you just have to decide which is more important to you. But we will obviously see what happens with all of this, hopefully sometime this year. We go now to another story about Boris Johnson. Another story about Boris Johnson kind of ignoring norms of how democracy is conducted. 4 bodies representing news photographers have accused Number 10 of excluding them from events, the latest in a succession of complaints that Johnson's government is attempting to limit media and press scrutiny. No independent photographers were allowed to witness Johnson signing the EU withdrawal agreement, or the moment that the UK left the EU on the 31st of January, when the Prime Minister banged a ceremonial gong. Usually these events are covered by 2 rota photographers from regional and national newspapers and newswires, but the only images allowed out of Downing Street were taken by the Prime Minister's official photographer, Andrew Parsons. Now, this comes on the heels of Johnson excluding a certain number of journalists from press briefings at Number 10. That actually prompted a real reaction from the journalists, including Laura Kuenssberg and Robert Peston, got up and walked out of the briefing saying, no, that's not how press freedom works. But the Prime Minister doesn't seem to care very much. He's still kind of excluding certain groups from normal Number 10 briefings. What do you think he's trying to achieve, first of all?
Well, I think there's 2 things. In terms of excluding individual parts of the press, we know that after the walkout by the TV journalists, after there have been briefings since at which the Scottish press have been excluded because they're too parochial, because they weren't national press, and so they apparently don't count, which I think is another indication of a similar story from Johnson. I think, personally, I would put this story into the context of his, or maybe Dominic Cummings more likely, approach to attack and to devalue and to remove where they can all manner of the elements of the Constitution and the institutions which provide the essential checks and balances in a country where there is no written constitution to speak of. So we know that we have seen being trailed in the press the intentions to attack the BBC. They've excluded no government minister does the Today programme on Radio 4 now, but also the indication that the intention is to significantly reduce the size and importance of the BBC as a news and press organisation. We already see the intention to put Michael Gove in charge of an attack on the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary, and I would even go so far as to say that the catastrophe, well, catastrophe is maybe too strong a word, the burach of the reshuffle during the week with the loss of the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the reduction or the neutering of the independence of the Treasury is another indication. I think that the tension that is required to exist between the Treasury and Number 10, as you would expect in any business to see the tension between a finance director and a chief executive, that tension, which is intended to improve the performance of the business or of the government, with the resignation of Javid and the neutering of the political advisors in the Treasury and the intention to run political advice in the Treasury from Number 10, that is another important check and balance on the behaviour of a Prime Minister that has been removed. And this is a Prime Minister who has a significant majority in the House of Commons already. And so in the context of reducing or degrading or removing all of the institutions and the checks that we rely upon in a country where there is no written constitution, I think this is probably another indication of a broader approach. And we know that Cummings has said in the past that he wants to tear everything up and start again, and we know that he hates the civil service. But I do think that this is, and to Gwen's point in terms of there being a drip, this is another of a number of attacks, all of which are happening simultaneously, and all of which are a cause for concern.
Yeah, Gwen, as Andrew was saying, after the general election, ministers were told to boycott the Today programme, Good Morning Britain on ITV, and Channel 4 News. Now that's three fairly substantial ways that people find out what's happening in the world. What do you think? What do you think becomes of Britain if we have a Prime Minister who is not willing to engage with the press in an open way? I mean, what does that? How does that change how the country operates? Do you think?
Well, I think that it's again. I mean, I'm not sure how it would change things because, quite honestly, we are very much capable now of doing our own research to find information out. Since World Wide Web, it's fantastic. Anybody who just takes the word of a news reel or a newspaper as the gospel, and they really ought to do their own checking. But the point is, I don't know that it's as important to think about it like that. It's more like it's like, what can we get away with? It's like a wee bit like a lark, isn't it, that they're doing again, going back to what I was saying about what I remember feeling about Osborne and Cameron, right? They've got this kind of like club and they'll just see what they can get away with, right? So he's actually pushing the boundaries now to see what are we actually going to do about this. And I mean, obviously the proroguing of Parliament was yet again one of those other stunts, but clearly that wasn't allowed through Scots law, which is really good to see. And also it shows again the difference, which we're always keen to be able to show anyway, to show why we want independence. But no, it just feels a bit like let's see what we can get away with here. So I just imagine Boris Johnson and Cummings sitting in a room coming up with these plans to see what they'll do next. And also it means that he can get to control what's written about him to some degree or another. But perhaps I'm being a bit too light-hearted here, but maybe he just wants somebody to photograph his good side. Because he does have a lot of, he thinks a lot of himself, doesn't he? And he wants to look good. It
is fairly easy to take a ridiculous picture of him, certainly. For a while that seemed to be what his whole career was built on.
Correct.
So I mean, obviously, even if that's the case, it's still a problem. What do you think the media can do to kind of fight back? Is there something that media organisations can do to make sure that he doesn't get away with this kind of thing anymore?
Well, I suppose there are perhaps themes of the media is, in a sense, technology is helping the media democratise, and so there are more and more citizen journalists, as they would style themselves. That brings problems as well as opportunities, but if citizen journalists are approaching what they are doing in an honest and transparent manner, then we are all now able to capture what we see in front of us. Everybody carries a phone, and I think that might then reflect that in Scotland I know we've been told we'll see a lot more of the Prime Minister this year. I don't think we will. I think we'll maybe see him flying into RAF Lossiemouth, disappearing into a forest to a business that supports the Tory party, having a small meeting with a small group of selected chums, and then disappearing again. But putting that to one side, I think we are all empowered and enabled to report and to share what we see, either the implications on our streets of austerity, or the conduct or misconduct of politicians or leaders who we encounter from time to time. So there is that aspect, and I think otherwise it is important, and I think organisations like Channel 4 and the BBC, to a lesser extent, they do regard their independence and their constitutional function as being quite important. So I think we can anticipate seeing, for example, Channel 4 continuing to persist in doing all that they can to hold politicians and the government to account and ask the difficult questions and point out the difficulties that the press, especially the print media who are supportive of Johnson, simply don't do anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think we just have to keep reminding people that this is what the government is doing, because it's very easy if they decide to boycott these shows that it just never gets mentioned, and you just don't notice that government ministers are never questioned by the presenter of Today.
Correct.
So we just have to keep reminding you that the government is not telling you everything. That there are things they're trying to conceal from you in one way or another, and it's hopefully part of Broadcasting Scotland's job to let you know what's happening. So anyway, we do move on now to another story about the press being under attack in a very different way this time. This is the very sad story of Caroline Flack, who was found dead at her home on Saturday. Flack, who was 40 years old, was found at her home, apparently the victim of suicide. This comes after she had been accused of assaulting her boyfriend, Lewis Burton, which he had said didn't happen, or that he didn't want her to be prosecuted. But the press went very, very hard on her, and a lot of people today are saying that she was basically hounded to death. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't watch Love Island, which is the show that Caroline Flack hosted. I don't really watch any of these kind of shows, so she wasn't somebody I was very familiar with. Is it somebody either of you kind of knew who she was?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah, so what was your kind of reaction when you heard about this case?
Well, we found out about it yesterday. I thought it was actually incredibly tragic. I mean, it seems that there's been some kind of a case where she supposedly assaulted her boyfriend, but then I don't know that it was ever really something they were pursuing, but I presume that she'd been under so much pressure about it. I mean, we don't really know. There's a lot of stuff on social media about it today, and an awful lot of people are very upset about it. And I feel personally it's just a tragedy, you know. It's just a young woman, and there's hopefully should have been a better option for her than that, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't the first time we've ever heard of somebody feeling hounded into self-harm or suicide through the actions of the British press. This Is there some sort of line that the press shouldn't be crossing? Is there some way we can know where those limits should be? Because clearly, you know, a public figure accused of assaulting her boyfriend, that is a news story. You know, she is a public figure, and that is a story. Where do you think the line comes for the press in how to handle these things? Because clearly a lot of people feel that the coverage of this case in particular was extreme and kind of went too far.
Well, I don't read mainstream media,
No.
newspapers, or listen to the news, really, quite honestly, so I wouldn't really have known any of that was going on personally. But it's quite clear they've taken it. It's a bit like a dog with a bone. They've got a bit of information, so they're going to keep going. And because she was, really quite well known for the last few years, I think it's been 3 or 4 years they've been running Love Island, and she was presenting it. And I thought, personally, she was really good at what she did. She was just, a really good personality. And I don't really know the ins and outs of the case, obviously, but how dreadful, and how dreadful that they would continue to keep publishing stuff about it. But this is what they do. Basically, there's really been, and I hate to say this too, the people that buy this stuff, they want to read this stuff. That to me is an indication that it's not a particularly nice world we live in, when people actually like to read this kind of stuff, or maybe they don't like to read it, but it's there and it's being printed. But these are people's lives, these are people's children, these are people's, lives that are being ruined, and I can really understand why Prince Harry's gone to live in Canada. Same thing,
Andrew, you, this is, as Gwen says, these are things where the press just seems to get a hold of certain stories and just won't let them go. And it's a difficult thing, because we're talking on one hand about making sure that the press is free to do what it needs to do, and that there shouldn't be political interference with the press. But then at the same time, we have cases like this. We have, ample experience of the media not necessarily telling us the whole truth. A lot of people were specifically accusing the Sun of a big role in this, and we know the history of the Sun in terms of smearing dead people, and just telling lies, actually pumping out government propaganda at times. So what's the kind of solution to this? Again, just in the next 30 seconds or so, is there something that the press can do or something that we could do or government could do that would kind of stop the press from taking these really aggressive lines on people? Well,
I think your point about the Sun is well made. I think the campaign in Liverpool to prevent the Sun, to take the wind out of the Sun sails by not selling the paper there, by not buying it. I think that is probably the direct answer. And I think I'm of an age where I certainly remember the 96 people who were smeared by the Sun. And I think the campaign in Liverpool has been successful, and I think it should continue. And I think it should broaden here as well. The malign influence of the Sun in particular one way of dealing with it directly is to defund the paper and the organisation. I think there are broader issues in the current environment with. I think David Baddiel wrote in the Times about a month ago about the social media platforms nuclearising comment and nuclearising the way in which people are abused, and I think that I think works hand in glove with the Sun and the Mail and their approach to celebrity in order to get clicks onto their website. I think there are protections. I think. So far as I'm aware, the prosecution of Caroline Flack was proceeding, and so the Contempt of Court Act applies to the reporting of those proceedings. But it appears that the tabloid press really had very little consideration for that aspect. And I think certainly, as we move into after Brexit, the balancing of the rights of the press and the rights of the individual is something that needs to be looked at. In the UK, we have very limited privacy rights, especially in comparison to other European countries, and I think that bears looking at, and the historical context as well. We were saying this is a live news issue at the moment. However, we think we've seen on our screens just recently more dramatisation of the Profumo affair, which ended with the suicide of Dr. Stephen Ward, who, under pressure from the security services and the mainstream media, took his own life before his trial. So these are not new problems. We've had these problems for 50 years. And unfortunately, we do not yet seem to have found an answer to them. But the waste of somebody's life in these circumstances, and the damage to everyone affected, her boyfriend, her family, her friends, is a terrible loss. And I don't think that we reflect properly yet on the implications that all suicides have, whether the person is famous or not famous. The damage and the implications ripple out from the events for years and years to come. And so we do need to begin to address this and think very seriously about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to anyone watching, We know that often when a celebrity, a public figure commits suicide, that there's often kind of echoes of that. People who are fans of the person will feel themselves suicidal. We know that happens often. So if you are feeling, down right now, then please contact the Samaritans, Breathing Space, some friend or family member that can talk to you. There's always somebody there to help if you feel that you need it. So please, if you're in that frame of mind now, please take care of yourself. We must move on now, though. And this is the BBC. Fran Unsworth, the broadcaster's head of news and current affairs, has admitted to the political pressures that are undermining efforts to preserve the licence fee. Unsworth said attacks on the BBC standards of impartiality from sections of the political left as well as from right-wingers was a Brexit thing. When you get a binary referendum choice that reframes politics, people take sides in a way that they don't in normal times, she said. And then talking about the threat of cuts to funding from the government, we tend to get caught up in a maelstrom. If people don't see their own truth expressed, then they see it as an untruth. And social media now means that narratives can take hold that are not based in fact. So the BBC has been under pressure recently. Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, amongst others, have suggested that maybe the licence fee is not an appropriate way to fund the BBC, that maybe the BBC has to become more self-sustaining. But then we hear Fran Unsworth here saying that the problem is that you're just not hearing the truth. That we tell the truth, you're getting the wrong idea about what's happening from other sources. It's a very difficult thing to sit in the Broadcasting Scotland studio and defend the licence fee, defend the BBC, because clearly one of the reasons Broadcasting Scotland exists is to counter the kind of problems that we saw in the mainstream media from 2014 and just before, right up until the present day. But what's your feeling about this current wave of attacks from the Tories on the BBC?
Well, I think there are maybe two things here. Firstly, it struck me immediately on reading this story and hearing this story that Ms. Unsworth is speaking, that is in no way speaking to the experience of licence fee payers and viewers in Scotland. This characterisation of the issues that there have been with the reporting and the politicisation of the reporting by the BBC ignores our lived experience for the last 5 or 6 years. And I think it's no surprise that a number of commentators from north of the border have said it's about time that the political classes south of the border woke up to this issue, because north of the border we've been dealing with it. Broadcasting Scotland is one of the ways to deal with it. We've been dealing with it for several years now, and no satisfactory answer has come forward yet. So, on the one hand, one could say that if the BBC is attracting criticism from both sides of the political spectrum, then it is probably doing its job. That's one measure, perhaps. However, I think that because the political spectrum is becoming so polarised at the moment, the centre ground is very weak, and so it suits the agendas of both extreme ends of the spectrum to attack anybody who would shine a light or attempt to shine a light on them. I think it's not a surprise that the BBC is being attacked. I know that the BBC defended their election coverage by saying that the issues that we saw in Scotland and elsewhere were a series of mistakes. And if that is true, I think that suggests that the BBC needs to up its game, is probably a simple way of putting it. To have stumbled across so many mistakes in the space of a relatively short general election campaign is unacceptable for an organisation the size of and experience of the BBC. But I think on the one hand, they are, as I've said earlier in the programme, I think the BBC are an important part of the constitutional framework that we operate in at the moment. However, they are under significant difficulty, and they must find it difficult to defend themselves when there have been so many mistakes or errors in even the most recent general election campaign.
And Gwen, this is one of the things where the BBC always defends themselves by saying, oh, we get attacked as much from the left as from the right. Everybody thinks we're wrong. Everybody thinks we're biased to the other side. But it's quite hard, I think, for anybody with an objective eye to deny that there have been real problems with the way the BBC has projected certain stories. I mean, we saw, for example, during the election campaign, multiple examples of them editing footage to make Boris Johnson look better. Which is not just well, that's just the spin that we put on the story. That's a conscious decision somebody has made to change the reality of the reporting. So what's your feeling about this? I mean, should people and the people who support independence, people on the left, should we be all standing up and saying, no, protect the BBC even though we know there's problems with it, or should we just be joining in the attacks because we've got all these we've all got all these problems that have been building up for years?
Well, I certainly won't be campaigning to save the BBC. I'm sorry to say, I do think it has produced some amazing programmes, and I do like some of the, the kind of, I'm really into art and history and stuff like that. So there's really good stuff on about that. I do know that, but actually, what I think's happened here is that we've known for years that this has been going on. I mean, 2014 was absolutely a slap in the face. The way things were being broadcast and the way it was put across very, very, very much to make the independence campaigners look a wee bit silly all the time, a wee bit silly, a wee kind of jokey, kind of as if we're all a wee bit kind of not quite right in the head, basically, right? And how and always have interviews along with the Westminster parties, right? And yet, where's how many are actually representing Scotland now? Really, why do they get so much say?
Yeah.
Why? So yeah, we all know this, but okay. But I think what's happened here is that the Brexit situation has woken up potentially how many 50% of the people who live in the rest of the UK to what's actually been going on. So the way that they're talking about left or right is really neither here nor there. What it is people have realised, wait a minute, that's not what happened, or why aren't they telling us this or telling us that? So they themselves have got a lot of questions to ask, and they're going to have to face up to the fact that the independence campaigners and the people who voted to remain in the EU, not that they're the same thing, but there's a similarity here, are not going to be supporting them pretty much anymore.
Yeah, I mean,
until that changes,
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite amusing to me on one level to see, for example, Labour voters suddenly saying, but the BBC is suddenly biased against us, and you kind of go, well, we did mention this a few times in 2014, and you told us we were crazy Nazis. So there is a certain amount of irony to hearing that. What do you think the outcome of this is going to be, Andrew? Do you think the BBC is going to change in order to suit the agenda of Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, or are they going to stand strong and end up getting disempowered somehow? What's your feeling about what happens next?
I think the BBC certainly will have a challenge. We know they have a history of severe political interference, particularly from Tory governments, with Mrs Thatcher removing Director Generals, for example, in the past. And so I think the BBC is facing significant challenges, both in terms of the politics and their role in the UK, but also commercially. The broadcasting industry has changed in terms of drama and history programmes. Netflix and others are beginning to eat the BBC's lunch, and so the BBC, I think, will have to evolve and move forward if it is to continue to retain the position that it has, and it needs to reform its news output because it is now the medium has become the message. BBC News has become the news, and that can't be right for a news organisation. That has to be addressed.
Do you think, I mean, you mentioned the kind of polarisation that we have in politics now, to the point where we can't always agree on basic facts. Is there a way that a national broadcaster can bring the country together the way they keep talking about?
Well, they will certainly be challenged. I think a return to fact-based journalism and fact-based reporting would be a refreshing change. I do think that the determination to present what is supposedly balance, for example, in the discussions around about climate change, is not balance at all, and simply gives platforms to people who have agendas. It's not fact-based. So a return to a greater use of experts. And I know that the government don't like experts, but so they told us. But a return to a greater adherence to facts will help. And also, even though we have a more polarised political landscape at the moment, I think it reflects also in terms of the approach to celebrity as well. A more considered, more humane, more nuanced, more thoughtful society would assist us in having debates where people are not polarised and there's an opportunity to actually listen as well as try and browbeat others in debate. And a combination of that with some facts would be a good thing.
Yeah, well, we will always strive to reach that standard here on Broadcasting Scotland. You can decide for yourself how closely we meet it. But we are going to move on now to our last story of the day, and this is about the All Under One Banner Assembly that happened yesterday. So Andrew, as our resident All Under One Banner leader, tell us a wee bit about what was happening yesterday and how it went.
I'm an organiser with All Under One Banner. It's a group of a number of people who work very hard. So we innovated this year. We felt that it was useful to organise assembly, which took place yesterday in Glasgow, and that was to bring together people from across the Yes movement and other activists. We were looking to welcome them into a space where they could co-create and could consider how we evolve and develop the marches and rallies that All Under One Banner promotes. We were looking to strengthen the Yes movement to do that, and we were looking to galvanise the marches to build and to energise them even more than has been the case for 2020. I think it's important in the current environment with the potential for Indie Ref at some point in the imminent future that we are demonstrating and that we are on the streets as much as possible. So the purpose in Assembly was to gather feedback and to work with across the Yes movement. And so, for example, themes that emerged yesterday were around about increasing the degree of localisation that we have in the organisation and development of individual marches. That's something that we are doing actively and a great deal already, for example, in particular for the marches in Arbroath and Elgin. However, it is something that we would like to do more of, and that was something we were hearing back from the Yes movement yesterday, so there will be more of that. Another suggestion was round about whether we should think that we should consider or propose that individual marches adopt more of a consistent theme. So, for example, defending our NHS, talking about climate change, talking about the nuclear industry, both military and civilian in the UK, talking about the EU, and developing those themes around individual marches, because some marches we repeat annually in Glasgow and Edinburgh, for example. And also feedback was that people would like more music. We must have much more music. And so that is certainly something that we are going to develop. There is always music, as you would expect, in these marches, but the marches have grown considerably in size, so we need to increase considerably the amount of music that's participating, and so we're going to do that too. But we had great feedback yesterday as well. People are telling us that they feel that the Assembly was a great opportunity for them to be with like-minded folks. That's direct feedback that we had, and I think that reflects the marches as well. They demonstrate the like-mindedness of the Yes movement in towns and cities across the country. So people who might privately support independence can see visibly they are not alone. We are 51% of the population at least, and so please come and join what are also positive and social events. Feedback for yesterday was that the debates and the discussions were positive and they were in a social setting, and I feel strongly that the marches reflect that as well. They are positive events, they are social events for everybody from 9 to 99 and their indie dogs to come along too. And so we saw a reflection in Assembly yesterday, and we've got some great ideas to galvanise and energise and continue to grow the marches through 2020.
Ah, brilliant. Well, and Gwen, just to come to you for a wee minute. All Under One Banner has, kind of taken Scotland by storm over the last couple of years. We've all been impressed by what they've achieved and how well run these big marches have been. You are now you've just recently got involved with the Scottish Independence Foundation as well, yes, which is kind of trying to achieve some similar goals of trying to just advance the movement in various different ways, trying to make sure that the resources are in place so that people can do things. So what's your feeling about All Under One Banner, about SIF, and where the independence movement as a whole goes from here?
Well, I congratulate All Under One Banner for what was a really superb day yesterday. Some great ideas, some really amazing, sort of energy, and really great to meet lots of different people as well. That were all involved in independence as well, but you haven't not necessarily met them. Now, I think one of the best things about the marches and rallies, which also links into what I'm going to say about SIF, is that it's showing that there's a huge energy of people doing things, right? And we are, as a nation, obviously showing that we're perfectly capable of organising ourselves in great numbers and in greater numbers. And I think the march last month in Glasgow, which was incredible, even though the weather was absolutely atrocious, and I was just delighted by the atmosphere and the things and that's been achieved by our determination, right? So I always imagine that people who see that could not be anything but moved by it. They must see that we really mean business here. But okay, so what SIF are doing is that if people have ideas, if you're in a yes group, or even as an individual, if you have an idea that you think would bring the independence issue to another audience perhaps, or a new idea which we could follow or we could take up, then they will consider funding that for you. And that's really what they've been doing, and they've been doing it for the last 18 months. And I've just kind of recently joined them to help, like with publicity and press, and I don't think people really know what they've been doing.
No,
They have been
just
really
gonna ask
amazing,
that, yeah,
right? Because I've just been finding out myself, but again, that's exactly the same. When you see the list of things they've assisted with, and these things are all part of how we're now as a nation. This is what we're doing. It's not just about politics, because I really think was quite a clear message that came out of yesterday, that we're not necessarily judging our country as a politically active. We're saying, what is it we're contributing? And there was a huge discussion about climate change yesterday, a huge discussion about how trident and nuclear weapons, was that really something we know it isn't something that Scotland wants, but so I don't know that it's. So we're showing that we're really, really active in terms of getting these things to happen, to go out there into a lot of towns and a lot of places, but equally there's stuff going on in pretty much all over Scotland anyway that people are doing. So hats off to Scotland, yay, well done.
And just quickly then, Andrew, what's next for All Under One Banner then?
So we are, notwithstanding the weather this weekend, the winter will come to an end, and so we are focused at the moment on 7 marches through 2020. First of which is a big event on Saturday the 4th of April in Arbroath, the 700th anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, which is something that, from my experience this week, is getting lots of attention around the world. As soon as you explain to somebody what the Declaration of Arbroath was, it seems to resonate with them and they're interested. And so we're in the midst of planning with the local groups in Arbroath a great weekend's march, a great Saturday's march and rally on the 4th of April, and then after that we will run through the monthly marches in Glasgow, in Stirling, in Elgin, Kirkcaldy, Peebles, and Edinburgh in October. So a very busy summer of lots of activity and demonstrations and positivity on the streets of Scotland, in cities and towns, but starting with a bang, I think, in Arbroath.
And if people want to get involved with All Under One Banner, how can they do that?
Principally 2 ways. The website at www.auob.org. There are communications through that. They can email us at allunderonebanner@mail.com. Or principally our communications run on Facebook, so search on Facebook for All Under One Banner and you will find all of our presence for the events, for the marches, for the rallies, and for a homepage for All Under One Banner there. So Facebook or auob.org, or email us at allunderonebanner@mail.com.
Brilliant. And if anybody's wanting to pitch an idea to SIF, how do they go about doing that?
Basically, you just go to sif.scot.
SIF.scot.
Simple as that.
Well, that's a very easy
And it tells you
one.
how to apply, and just apply. Just ask. Don't worry about it. Just ask, and it will be considered. All ideas are considered. So.
Brilliant. Well, that does give us some food for thought as we move forward in this year when we are assured that we are going to be having a second independence referendum at some point. So if you do have something you want to contribute, please do what you can. That goes for all Broadcasting Scotland too, where we are now just coming to the end of the show. And as always, we want to remind you that it does cost money to make TV programmes. We would invite you, please, if you're able to afford it, to go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month can make a huge difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland. We would also invite you, if you would like to volunteer with Broadcasting Scotland, if you'd like to get some experience as a journalist, working backstage, working behind the cameras, or if you want to get on camera like me and become a TV superstar, then you have that option as well. We would love to get you involved. So if you would like to get involved, just contact us. Go to the website, broadcastingscotland.scot, go to the contact page, or you can just tweet at us at broadcastscot. And we would also like to announce, you may have heard this on our social media over the last day or two, but we do now have our Amazon Fire app out there, so you can now ask Alexa to fire up Broadcasting Scotland for you. So if you have an Amazon Fire Stick, then please go and have a look, make sure it's working, let us know what you think of it. We'd love to hear from you. So that does bring us to the end of the show. We'd like to thank Andrew Wilson and Gwen Sinclair very much for being here. It's been a pleasure as always. I'd like to thank you for joining us as well, and we will be back tomorrow at 7 with Scotland at 7. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Full Scottish at 12 again. But until tomorrow night, thanks for joining us. Have a great day.